Hey everyone, it's Professor McKinney here in downtown Chattanooga, and we have a great video coming up where we're going to be talking about base compensation. So yeah, let's dive into it. So over the next several videos, we're going to be talking about all sorts of compensation. Now, this video specifically, we are talking about base compensation, and we have a really special guest that's going to join us on this call. So our special guest, her name is Tina. Tina and I actually worked together throughout the years, and I met her my senior year when I was in the undergraduate program at UTC. And Tina's really been like a mentor to me over the years and someone that I've been able to just run different things by as I've been progressing in my career. So with that being said, I will let Tina introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Tina Kamba, and I am an assistant professor of management and HR at Athens State University. I'm also a lawyer and HR consultant. What I love about HR is that HR is in the business of helping people, and we are able to touch lives and help and support employees at every level. And that includes serving employees and also employers and the managers that serve organizations as well.
Awesome, Tina. Thank you so much for that very quick introduction. So with that, we will get started with our first learning objective.
What is the difference between financial and non-financial compensation?
John, that is a great question. Financial compensation refers to the payment or reward that individuals receive for in exchange for their work or services. That's typically a monetary award. So you're thinking about wages and salaries, bonuses and commissions, and other monetary benefits such as health insurance, retirement, stock options, and paid time off. Now you compare that with non-financial compensation, and it's what it sounds like. Basically, it's all that non-financial compensation that employees get that doesn't involve cash. So when you think about what we might think of as benefits in a workplace, such as development opportunities, paid education, attending conferences and retreats, going to recognition ceremonies and being recognized for, say, 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years of service. Also, I think most importantly, flexible scheduling. So we are interested right now in working remotely and working in different ways. And that's also a non-financial compensation, and also discounts or gym memberships. Those are other types of non-financial compensation.
What are the four forces influencing direct financial compensation?
So direct financial compensation, it's shaped by several different key forces that we're looking at. So the first one is actually the labor market. And you've probably heard a lot about the labor market over the last several years. But that really does play a significant role into the compensation, the base compensation that people are paid. So if you think about it, it's really kind of like the availability and the demand for specific skills, and that's what influences the pay levels. So an example would be if you are looking for a company, or if the company is looking for someone that meets all these different skill sets, and there's only two people that can match what they're looking for, then that's going to pay a lot more. However, if you're hiring for a role that a lot of people can do, then that's going to pay a lot less. So an example in my work is I was looking to hire a camp manager to work at our South Pole camp this last year. And there's only a handful of people in the world that could do that, or even has the experience to do that type of work. And so that pay is significantly more than what we are paying our kitchen assistants, which primarily are washing dishes and keeping our dining facilities clean. So that just kind of shows the difference in the labor market, right? How many applicants do you have as opposed to the skills that the company's needing? The other thing that we're really looking at is a company's ability to pay, right? If a company is not financially strong, then no matter how much they want to pay, they may just not have the funds to do it. The second thing is the company's ability to pay. And with financially stronger organizations, they typically offer higher wages. Then we have the cost of living with different areas and how that affects compensation. So, an example would be that a role that requires someone to work in person in Los Angeles would be different pay rates than what we are paying someone here in Chattanooga to do a job. And the last thing we're looking at is the legal requirements, right? For higher paying roles, this isn't necessarily as much of an issue, but when we're looking at lower paying roles, you think of like what's the minimum wage, or what's the baseline that's set by that state regulation as far as the lowest amount you can pay someone. So, those four things: the labor market, the company's ability to pay, the location, and then also, the legal requirements. Those are really the four main things that influence the base pay and financial compensation.
How do organizations evaluate the worth of a job?
Well, it depends on the organization, but I will say that generally employers determine salaries based on 5 types of information. The first type of information is the job responsibilities or how the job is defined, right? You might see that in a job description. Typically, candidates see that in a job posting. The second thing that's considered is what the competitors are paying for that job. So the price of the job, right? And that can be found through doing market salary reviews, right? Or looking at what competitors pay. A lot of companies utilize third parties to do salary studies, and they use that information. The third is looking at the job's value within the organization. So the question is, how is that job valued in relation to other jobs? Okay. So is it a C-suite position, for example? So that's a highly valued job. So it's probably going to be paid more relative to other positions. The fourth criteria is where the job fits in the salary grade or the pay range. So again, I have to refer to the type of organization. So some organizations don't have a pay grade or a salary range. So they're not going to have a guide to refer to, but most bigger organizations and certainly government organizations have structures that are in place and classification systems where they're going to look and see how people are paid in roles that are similar to the position in question. And then lastly, it's important to consider the budget and the organizational needs. So that's going to drive also how an organization evaluates the worth of a job.
What are the 3 methods most commonly used for job pricing?
So, when it comes to determining the value of a job, organizations really rely on three main methods. So, that is market pricing, job evaluation, and pay grading. So, market pricing, what that does is you actually look at what other employers are paying in similar roles, right? So, you could go online and just type in job titles that are similar and look at the job descriptions to see, what other jobs that match what you're hiring for in your organization and what those companies are paying. Another thing is that you can do a job evaluation, which involves assessing like a job's value based on factors like the responsibilities and skills that are needed. So I used to actually do job evaluations when I worked for the city of Chattanooga. And I remember that I got to spend days just, following people around in their jobs and learning what they do. So that way we could correctly evaluate, the responsibilities and the skills that are needed for those roles. The last thing is pay grading. And you do that really when you're working on like large compensation plans. And that's when you put jobs into similar groups and you kind of put them in different levels. And then you set a specific pay range for that group. So these three methods, they're really what companies use to ensure that compensation is fair and competitive.
What are the 4 special compensation issues that organizations are facing?
So there's a handful of issues that organizations are facing, sort of since the COVID-19 era, when a lot of companies were facing a lot of issues with staffing and being able to attract people to work for them. Today when we look at companies, several of these unique compensation challenges are managing pay equity. And we see this especially when we're dealing with different demographics. It's really important. Also, the rise of remote work has really kind of brought into different questions about how to fairly compensate employees that are working in various locations. So, an example would be that I work remotely from home in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and the company that I work for is based out of Salt Lake City, Utah, which has a significantly higher cost of living. So, do I get paid the same as what I would be making in Salt Lake City, Utah, where my expenses are higher? Um, then there's also, trying to balance being competitive with pay and the ability to attract talent while controlling your cost. It can be difficult. When before COVID, I mean, I always hate talking about COVID because I feel like that's now in the past. We're moving on to the next thing, but it really did affect kind of like the pay rates for various positions in the workforce. So, we saw where a lot of like marketing positions really grew in their pay rates after COVID, and kind of like the demands people were able to make. But also, human resources professionals really grew in their compensation rates as well. I know during the years of COVID, a lot of my friends were able to double their salaries from before COVID to what they're currently making now. I also did that as well. So, the role, human resources people have, there's a lot of competitive pay out there for a good human resources person or a good marketing person or other types of positions as well. And companies are trying to figure out how to, balance what they need to pay in order to be competitive, along with their controlling their costs. And that's kind of gotten difficult in the last couple of years for companies. And then finally, the last thing that companies are kind of like facing is offering non-traditional benefits like flexible work schedules. That's been a really significant part of compensation strategies to kind of meet new expectations, right? A lot of people are wanting flexibility. A couple of years ago, everyone was wanting to work remotely. That's kind of stepped away now. And there's still people that want to work remotely, but some people want hybrid and some people want in the office. But across the board, everyone is wanting flexibility. And that's something that a lot of employers are kind of dealing with and struggling with to be able to offer that correctly where it still supports their operations. So these are, the four kind of like different, unique, special compensation issues that organizations are actively facing.
What is the Fair Labor Standards Act, the Equal Pay Act, and workers' compensation?
The Fair Labor Standards Act is a U.S. law that protects workers against certain unfair pay practices. So the FLSA, that's short for Fair Labor Standards Act, it sets out labor regulations, including regulating minimum wages, requirements for overtime pay, and also it limits child labor. So typically, employees are categorized as either non-exempt or exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act. So if they're non-exempt, then those employees are going to be eligible for overtime, for example, whereas exempt employees are typically not. And so this is a very important piece of legislation that every HR professional needs to be aware of, especially as it relates to compensation, because minimum wage is also set by the Fair Labor Standards Act. And states have their own versions of wage and hour laws. So you not only have to be aware of the Fair Labor Standards Act, but you have to be aware also of your state's wage and hour laws. Next, we have the Equal Pay Act. And the Equal Pay Act is actually legislation that originated in 1963, and it prohibits employers from paying different wages to men and women under certain similar work conditions and whose jobs require the same level of skill, effort, and responsibility. Okay, So, of course, this is a very important law. In 2009, the Lilly Ledbetter Equal Pay Act was passed, and that gave an extension. This is considered a part of the Fair Labor Standards Act, where now employees who feel like they've been paid in violation of the Equal Pay Act now have a longer period to raise that complaint. So I'll say when you are raising a complaint pursuant to a law, like a non-discriminatory law through the EEOC, the Employee Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, you typically have 180 days to file as of the date you became aware of the violation. Well, the Lilly Ledbetter Act actually extends that. So every time you receive a paycheck that indicates that there was unequal pay, allegedly, that 180 days starts every time you receive a paycheck. So that's a very important aspect of the Fair Labor Standards Act, the Pay Act, that every HR professional needs to be aware of. And last law I wanted to cover, or concept I should say, is workers' compensation. So workers' compensation is a type of compensation and benefits program that's available for employees that get injured on the job. Typically, those injuries happen in the scope of employment, and workers' compensation is governed at the state level. This is really critical to be aware of, both as an employee or as an HR professional or employer, because anytime your employee is injured on the job, that needs to be handled in accordance to the workers' compensation laws. And employees can, based on the injury and the facts surrounding it, employees can be eligible not only to have medical benefits covered because of their injury, but they can also be eligible for a portion of their pay. So this is very critical to understand. Again, you have to be aware of your state's workers' compensation laws to understand exactly what's required of you anytime your employee is injured.
So I hope that you enjoyed another week where we are going through a chapter in the textbook talking about the learning objectives. Now, as always, remember that this video, it's not intended to replace the reading that you're doing on your own, but it's instead supposed to supplement that and work alongside it. So make sure that you're still reading chapter 9 on based compensation in your textbook. And if you have any questions, as always, feel free to reach out, and I'll see you next week on